You check the date on your phone right now. Look at it. That number is not neutral. It is a religious claim, repeated billions of times a day by people who never think about it. Most of the world organizes time itself around one life, not an empire, not a war. One man, in one small province, who owned nothing and wrote nothing down. But the real story is far stranger than a calendar. To understand why a single life split history in two, you need to go back to a world that had no reason to expect it. Judea, in the 1st century, was a dusty corner of the Roman Empire. Rome ruled through fear and crucifixion, a punishment so brutal it was reserved for slaves and rebels. Most people lived and died within a few miles of where they were born. Religion was everywhere, but mercy was rare. The gods of Rome rewarded strength. The God of Israel's scriptures promised a rescuer, a Messiah, but centuries had passed in silence. Hope was thin. Then, in this unlikely setting, a child was born to a poor couple in a small town called Bethlehem, which simply means house of bread. Even the name was a quiet clue nobody noticed yet. He grew up working with his hands. Historians know almost nothing about his first 30 years. Then something shifted. He began to teach, and he taught like no one had heard before. He did not just interpret the law. He spoke as if he had authority over it. The Yale historian Jaroslav Pelikan spent decades studying how Jesus has been portrayed across cultures and centuries, and he noted that no other figure has been reimagined as rabbi, revolutionary, philosopher, and king by so many different societies trying to make sense of him. Why would one obscure teacher generate that much reinterpretation? Because the claims he made did not fit any existing category. He said he could forgive sins. In that world, this was not a kind gesture. It was a direct claim to divine authority, and the religious leaders around him understood it as such immediately. He touched lepers when the law said not to. He ate with tax collectors, the most despised people in Jewish society, while the respectable crowd watched in disgust. He told a woman caught in public shame that he did not condemn her, then told the men holding stones to look at their own lives first. Small moments. But each one quietly broke the social order of who deserved mercy and who did not. Then it got more dangerous. He started speaking about the temple itself, the center of Jewish religious life, and what he said could be read as a threat against it. The historian N.T. Wright, who has spent much of his career reconstructing the world Jesus lived in, has argued that these were not abstract spiritual statements. They were a direct challenge to the political and religious establishment of Jerusalem. A poor rabbi was telling the most powerful religious authorities in the region that they had it wrong. That is not a safe thing to do. It is the kind of thing that gets you killed. And it did. He was arrested, tried in a process most legal historians consider deeply irregular, and handed to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. Pilate, by most historical accounts, did not see him as a serious threat, but the crowd's pressure and the political stakes won out. He was flogged, mocked, and nailed to a cross outside the city walls. Crucifixion was designed to be slow, public, and humiliating, a warning to anyone who challenged Roman order. By Friday evening, he was dead. His followers, the people who had left everything to follow him, scattered in fear. This is where almost every other story like this one ends. A promising teacher, killed by the system he challenged, remembered for a generation, then forgotten. But something happened that the historical record cannot fully explain away, no matter how skeptical the lens. Within days, his followers were not hiding anymore. They were proclaiming publicly, in the very city where he had just been executed, that he was alive. The New Testament historian Gary Habermas has spent decades cataloging what scholars across the theological spectrum agree actually happened in that period, regardless of their personal beliefs about the resurrection itself. And one fact almost all of them accept is this: the disciples were utterly convinced they had seen him alive, convinced enough that nearly all of them went on to suffer and die for that claim. People will die for what they believe is true. It is far rarer for people to die for what they know is a lie they invented themselves. Something happened to them. Whatever you believe it was, it transformed a handful of frightened fishermen into the founders of a movement that would not stop growing. That movement should not have survived. It had no army, no political power, no wealth. It spread through the lowest tiers of Roman society first, through slaves, women, the poor, the people the empire considered disposable. Yet within 3 centuries, against every expectation, it became the dominant religion of the very empire that had executed its founder. Why would the powerless inherit the empire of the powerful? Historians still debate the exact mechanics, but the pattern itself is undeniable. And the change did not stay inside church walls. The sociologist Rodney Stark, studying the early growth of Christianity through a historical and sociological lens rather than a theological one, found that Christian communities behaved differently during plagues that devastated the Roman world. While many fled the sick to save themselves, Christians, drawing directly from Jesus' teaching to love your neighbor, stayed behind to nurse the dying, even strangers, even at the risk of their own lives. That single behavioral shift, historians argue, dramatically improved survival rates within these communities and made the new faith strikingly attractive to a terrified population. An idea about how to treat the suffering reshaped how an entire civilization responded to death itself. From there, the ripples kept spreading outward. The concept that every human life has inherent dignity, regardless of status, gender, or usefulness to the state, was radical in the ancient world. It was not the default assumption of Rome or Greece. It traces directly back to the belief that every person is made in the image of God and is loved enough to die for. Hospitals, as organized institutions for caring for the sick, regardless of their ability to pay, emerged largely out of Christian communities living out that belief. Universities grew out of monasteries built to study and preserve knowledge. Even the modern instinct that the powerful are accountable to moral law, not just political power, has deep roots in a story about a carpenter's son who stood in front of an empire and did not back down. But the historical ripple effects, as enormous as they are, were never really the point. Underneath all of it sits a much smaller, much harder question, the one the religious leaders of his own time kept asking. Who do you actually think this man was? Because if he was simply a moral teacher, a good man with good ideas, his story is interesting but not life-altering. You can admire a teacher from a safe distance. But Jesus never left people that option. He claimed something far larger. He said the brokenness in the world was not just political or social. It was personal. It lived in the human heart, in pride, in selfishness, in the small cruelties people inflict on each other every day. And he claimed that his death was not a tragic accident, but a payment, a way of absorbing that brokenness so it would not have to define the people who carried it. That is the theological turning point underneath the historical one. Not just a teacher who said wise things, but a rescue that addressed something people could not fix themselves. You have felt that gap before, even if you have never used religious language for it. The moment you hurt someone you love and could not undo it. The moment you wanted to be better and somehow kept failing in the exact same way. The quiet suspicion that effort alone is not enough to fix what is actually wrong inside you. That is the exact ache this story claims to answer, not with a new rule to follow, but with the claim that the debt has already been paid. This is why the story did not stay locked in the 1st century. It kept intersecting individual lives, generation after generation, in ways that had nothing to do with empires or calendars. People in the grip of addiction who say something shifted only when they stopped trying to earn their way out and let themselves be forgiven instead. People who spent years punishing themselves for old mistakes, who finally exhaled when they understood that the punishment had already been carried by someone else. The poet and former skeptic C.S. Lewis, who set out to disprove Christianity entirely and ended up converting because of where the historical and philosophical evidence kept leading him, later wrote that he had never met anyone who became more loving, more present, less consumed by fear, by trying harder. They changed by believing they were already loved before they had earned it. So why did one life change everything? Not because he built an empire. He had none. Not because he wrote a book. He never did. He changed everything because he walked directly into the worst the world had to offer, the betrayal, the injustice, the public humiliation, the physical agony, and he did not run from it. He absorbed it. And then, according to the testimony of people who were willing to die rather than recant it, he walked back out of the grave on the other side of it. That claim either changes nothing or it changes absolutely everything, depending on whether you let yourself actually look at it. You checked the date on your phone earlier. Now look at it again. It is still a religious claim, repeated billions of times a day. But maybe the real question was never about the calendar at all. Maybe it was always about you.